begin with advisory fees. Advisory fees are paid for a number of services which include, but are certainly not limited to, the creation of a plan or an investment policy statement, the execution of that plan, creation of an asset allocation, advising and educating clients on new opportunities, monitoring, due diligence, cash flow needs, and generally providing their clients with the peace of mind that they all yearn for. Typically, there are 5 ways that advisors are compensated, or at least in 5 different fee models. The first being the transaction model, the second being assets under management, third being a project-based model, fourth, a time-based model, and fifth, some hybrid that includes all of the above. So let's flesh out each of these individually. Let's begin with the transaction model. The transaction model, I believe, is the most problematic one, and it is also the one that's most likely to eventually be extinct. The transaction model can compensate the advisor on the sale of an asset, on the purchase of an asset, on the retention of an asset through some kind of trailing commission, or some combination of the above. The transaction fee model tends to be different firm to firm and advisor to advisor, and often different for advisors within the same firm. It's also different strategy to strategy and asset class to asset class. So for example, buying a stock may have one price, whereas buying an option or a REIT or a fixed income product may have a different price altogether. The transaction model has a number of challenges. The first challenge is poorer performance. Studies at Harvard University Business School have demonstrated that buying funds from those who are compensated by the products they sell yields an inferior performance to those that are not. And that would be even before deducting for the additional fees or the commissions that would be paid to the advisor who is selling them. The other obvious challenge is that there tends to be a bias towards higher paying products, those that have richer fees. And further research on German investors demonstrate that commission compensated advisors tend to increase portfolio risk, increase the probability of loss, and portfolio turnover. The problem with portfolio turnover is that it encourages advisors to serve as knowing accomplices to one of our behavioral vulnerabilities known as the action bias. The most famous example of the action bias comes from goalkeepers in professional soccer. In analyzing hundreds of penalty kicks in professional soccer games, Israeli researchers determined that given the probability distribution of where the ball may end up, the optimal decision for a goalie is to stand smack dab in the center of the goal, instead of jumping either to the left or to the right. Yet in virtually every single situation that they analyzed, in every kick that they viewed, the goalkeeper jumped either to the right or to the left, often deciding which way to jump even before the kick was made. The reason offered by psychologists is that if a goal was scored and the goalie did nothing but stand in place, he or she would feel far worse than if they did something about it, if they jumped to one side and at least they tried their best. Advisors, asset managers, and even the investors themselves will find it harder to explain poor results while sitting on the sideline than to explain poor results when having tried their best. However, the consequences of the action bias are significant. When researchers compared the 20% of the most active equity investors with the 20% of the least active equity investors, they found a differential of 7.1% per annum between the two. A whopping difference between those that are least active and those that are most active, with the least active far outperforming their peers. In summary, while financial advisors should concern themselves with prudence, cost consciousness, and caution for their clients, the transaction model often motivates the exact opposite behavior. Could you imagine if your doctor was compensated by the medicines you purchased, or how frequently you changed medications? it's hard to imagine how valuable such counsel and advice may be. The next compensation model, the next fee model, would be the AUM model. AUM stands for assets under management, and the fees are typically a percentage thereof. Advisors often refer to this model as the fee only or the flat fee model, and yet there's nothing flat about it, as fees tend to rise with the rise in assets. What advisors generally mean by calling it a flat fee model is that they only get their fees from the client, or that they don't charge any commissions, or both. Data from Tralee advisors suggests that some 79% of all advisory compensation is derived from this AUM model. Once again, fees vary firm to firm, advisor to advisor, and even advisors within firms. Fees also vary quite meaningfully by the size of the portfolio. So an investor with $1 million would be paying considerably more than an investor with $10 million, typically. And sometimes the AUM model may be tiered. So much on the first million, so much less on the second million, and less still on the third million, and so on. The AUM model is not without its challenges. On a personal level, I have always struggled with the industry's infatuation with AUM, or asset under management compensation, for the advisors. For no other professional service are you asked to step on the scale before they give you the cost of the service. Why should a $40 million investor pay $400,000 when a $10 million investor is paying $100,000 for the exact same service, the exact same portfolio, and the exact same investment of time and resources by the advisor? The AUM model creates a sharp disconnect between price and value. Usually, the more you pay, the more you get. But not in finance. You could pay considerably more and get nothing more in return. Regrettably, investors with advisors on the AUM model often don't consider how much they are compensating their advisors in absolute dollars. And the brilliance of this model is a result of what I call the stealth fee effect. The stealth fee effect is a consequence of investors, or most investors, not taking out their checkbooks and writing a check to their advisor every month. Instead, they barely notice the trickle of funds that are leaving their accounts. This structure blunts the impact of the overall salaries that are being paid out, and often to the point of neglect. And I use the word salaries for a reason. Investors should not look at the fees that they pay as table stakes to participate, to come to the party. Rather, as salaries paid out to the investment professionals that are working for them. Percentages may appear less significant than they really are. Well, what's 0.5% or 1%? Well, that 1% on a $10 million portfolio is $100,000. And every investor has to ask themselves, did my advisor earn his $100,000 salary this year just as any other contractor or any other employee in any other domain? The third and fourth models that we referenced were the project-based model and the time-based model. The project-based model involves paying fees for either a particular task or a particular project that will help the investor become a better steward of their capital. So this may include the creation of an investment policy statement or a plan. It may be to modify their asset allocation. It may be a manager search or any other projects that the investor is hiring a particular advisor to do and paying a set fee, predetermined fee for that. A similar, though slightly different model is the time-based model, where the advisor is essentially retained for a period of time, whether paid hourly or through a retainer of some sort. And there, the advisor is serving as a consigliere, as an advisor, as a resource on an ongoing basis, helping the investor make better investment decisions. Our firm belief is that compensation should be commensurate with the value that's offered. And truly trusted advisors are often compensated by the value that they bring and the time that they spend. That is why a family's trusted advisor is usually an accountant, or perhaps even a lawyer. An accountant does not take a percentage of the taxes their clients pay, nor of the savings. In the same way that a doctor that just saved a particular patient's life doesn't take a percentage of their future earnings. So why should financial advisors be any different? The reality is, no fee model is perfect. But we believe that these two models best align the interests of the client and of the investment professional. Having said that, the project-based and time-based advisor is still a fairly rare breed, and largely because it's nowhere near as lucrative as the transactionary model or the AUM model. However, the industry is waking up. There are cost sensitivities that investors are starting to recognize. And data from the US suggests that some 16% of advisors that are currently on the AUM model or on the transactionary model believe that over the next 3 years, a large percentage of their own compensation will be driven by project-based or time-based fees. As we have seen, when fees and compensation are driven by a desire to accumulate more assets or by the volume of transactions, it not only adversely affects the investor, but it has a severe impact on the culture of the industry as a whole.